Hey, how you doing? This is RJ. Yesterday I talked about how Sana Amanat is using her position at Marvel as Vice President of Content and Character Development to push identity politics. And this can be readily seen by the fact that every time she gets a speaking platform, she talks about representation of women and minorities. And when you talk about representation in terms of minorities and women, you are speaking in terms of identity politics. And she does this every time she speaks, and when she talks about Marvel Rising, she says that things like representation of body positivity is extremely important, and that is one of the key elements to this entire series, which, because it has a comic and also a movie and also shorts on the internet, and at the same time her little brainchild of Women of Marvel is just directly centered around representation for women. And the thing is that when you say representation of women and minorities in this way, a normal person would just think about a good role model for women and minorities so that they can see these things and they can emulate them. But when you hear it in the terms of identity politics, and when she specifically speaks in this way, she's speaking about identity politics, she's speaking of it in terms of representation, in the fact that these people need to see this representation of their identity out in the world so that people of the same identity can get together in order to weaponize their identity, in order to get themselves these new privileges and rights, in order to protect their identity, and to some extent in order to oppress the people who have historically oppressed them. And you can see this in those avenues of Marvel Rising and of the podcasts of Women of Marvel. But I want to talk about the comics, because Sana Amanat is the director of content and character development for Marvel, and she is using her position as the director of content and character development to push these ideas that she talks about all the time into the comics at Marvel. And there's no denying this. She is pushing ideas. When she did her Fast Company video interview, which I did a video about, she talks specifically about using characters in comic books to push ideas. Her language is to push positive ideas, but of course the idea of positive for her would be identity politics. So to concentrate on the comics themselves and to see how it comes out in the comics, I'm going to look at 3 series. And these 3 series are America Chavez, Kate Bishop's Hawkeye, and Iceman. And all of these 3 series have been canceled. And Iceman has been brought back even though it has been canceled. But I'm specifically going to focus on these because they were canceled. Because the whole point is that, again, she had said in another interview that she did, actually it was a panel that she did for the San Diego Comic-Con, which I also did a video on. She says that these books, they get out there and they might not last as long as they would like, but just because they get out there, she considers that as success. So it doesn't matter if these books fail to generate any kind of audience or generate any kind of money, because there is no audience. She still considers these books, like America Chavez, because she was specifically talking about America Chavez, I do believe, in that panel. She still considers these books a success. Now, why in the world would she consider them a success? Well, her statement is she considers them a success because they get out there, and that's all they need to do. And the whole point is it makes no sense unless you look at it according to identity politics, of course, because she is putting a representation of these people and their identities out there. That's all she needs to do. That's what she is doing with the comic books. She is using them to put out representations, because quite specifically, that's what representation is supposed to be. It's supposed to be a soapbox that this person can get on so that everyone around can see them and their identity, and so that these people can generate a crowd of other people of the same identity so that they can get together and they can use their shared experiences of being oppressed to actually gain themselves the power of new rights and privileges. And we see this in different ways in these 3 books, because we can all see the identity that Iceman is rallying around. It's a homosexual man. That is his identity. And if you look at Kate Bishop's Hawkeye, her identity, her representation is of a woman. And it is of a woman who is empowered, of course, because she's always standing next to the actual Hawkeye, who, although he has proven himself time and time again to be an Avenger and to be a man who can stand on a battlefield with gods, even though he's just a man with a bow, he is shown to be ineffectual and of little value whatsoever next to this very young woman. And it's because this is her representation. And if you look at America Chavez is slightly more interesting because she has many different kinds of representation. She's a woman, she is a person of color, she is a lesbian as well, so she has intersectionality. So her representation is of intersectionality, and the entire book is centered around her going to this school, which has all of these different identity groups. And so what they are trying to represent there is, of course, this intersectionality of all these different identities. So the point is that when you actually get to see these things in the books, like Iceman, it actually answers a lot of questions which we at Comicsgate have. And a lot of these questions have been asked most often by Richard Meyer over at Diversity in Comics. And he asks questions like, why in the world is this stuff always being shoved in your face? Can't they just be a normal person that has this as part of their identity? That would be fine by him and a lot of other people that are part of Comicsgate. And that's what they say. They can just have this as part of their identity, and they would be fine with that. And at the same time, he's asking, why do they need to shove it in your face? They're asking, why do these SJWs create characters which are jackasses? Because you just look at their characters. These three characters, just look at the three characters that we're talking about right now. And they're all a bunch of jackasses. And you ask the question, why would these people write these characters in such a way? And especially Bobby Drake and Iceman, because the question that has been asked by Richard Meyer a lot is, you know, he said that he used to live in a gay neighborhood in New York. And most of the guys there were just guys. You couldn't actually tell the difference. And he's saying, why in the world can't you just make a character like that? Why does he have to be a flaming queen? You're just making fun of people like this when you present a character like that as a flaming queen, and not only like that, but also a jackass on top of that. So the answer to all of these questions is, of course, identity politics. Because the whole point of identity politics, again, is that they wish to gain themselves new rights and privileges. Now, quite specifically, we're talking about new rights and privileges. And they are privileges and rights that are above what normal people would have. So they don't want to be treated the same as everybody else. Quite the contrary. Nor do they wish to be treated in a way in which everybody recognizes that they are different, but then treats them the same. Because if you lived through the 80s and the 90s, people who had different kinds of identities like this were just always saying, all we want is to be treated the same. But today, all they're saying is, no, you need to treat us better. And this is identity politics coming through and through. Because the whole fact is, they don't want to be treated the same. Identity politics will not allow them to be treated the same as other people. Even if you recognize their differences, that's not enough. You have to treat them differently with the fact that they are different as the entire reason why you will treat them differently. And the way that you need to treat them differently, of course, is to give them more privileges and rights than the normal person. Now, the reason why they do this, of course, is because, well, you look at most of these identity groups, let's say, we'll go back to Bobby Drake, and we'll say homosexual people are, in North America, if you look at conservative reports, about 1% of the population. If you look at liberal reports, they're about 3% of the population. Now, most people, because of television, think that they're probably 20 to 30% of the population, but actually the average, if you take the conservative and the liberal and you average it out, it's about 2% of the population, we'll say, which is actually very small. And the whole point is, the reason why they don't want to be treated the same as everybody else, they claim, is the fact that if you treat them the same as everybody else, then because they're such a small percent of the population, their identities will get lost. This key part of their identity will be drowned out by all of the normalness, and therefore you can't actually treat them just like everybody else. Nor can you just recognize that they are different and then treat them like everybody else, because that would have the same effect. You would basically erase that part of the that identity, which they need to make the center and core of their whole being in identity politics. And so you need to treat them better than everybody else. You need to treat them with more respect and with these extra privileges and rights. And that's what they seek. They will never seek, if a person follows identity politics, they will never seek equality. They will seek superiority. And they always seek superiority. And this is the reason why they're always shoving this in your face. They're always taking their identity and shoving it in your face. And specifically, this is why Bobby Drake is the way that he is. He's a flaming queen, of course, because he can't be just a normal guy who has this part of his identity as a homosexual man as something that is actually just there in the corner. It can never be in the corner because the whole center of their identity needs to be that part of their identity which makes them different. And it needs to be front and center always. And the only way that you can make him front and center always is, of course, to make him a flaming queen. That way he has his homosexual man is always front and center of everything he does, and therefore it is always there in your face and needs to be always there in your face. Now, the reason why it needs to be there in your face all the time, of course, is for them to gain these special privileges, because they want to stick it in your face all the time in order to make you never forget that you are an oppressor and they are the oppressed. And since they are oppressed, you need to treat them better than you would treat a normal person, of course. And this also is the reason why they make all of these characters a bunch of jackasses. It's because, of course, these people are looking for extra rights and privileges. And they're also looking to shame other people by sticking their identity in other people's faces all the time. So, of course, since they are doing this to other people, sticking their identity in their face in order to shame them into making sure that they never forget that in this system they are the oppressors, and doing that in order to gain for themselves new rights and privileges, which is a self-centered thing to do, that is a way, of course, being self-centered and pushing things in other people's faces. That is what most people would define as a jackass. And so that's the whole point, you see. They're not actually just being written as jackasses. Someone isn't just saying, well, I'm going to write this character as a mean character. No, this character is supposed to be written specifically that way in order for him to follow identity politics. Because, of course, he is supposed to be gaining new rights and privileges for himself and for his identity group, over and above the normal people around him. He is always going to be selfish, and he is always going to be pushing things in other people's faces. And that is specifically the way that he has to be written. And it actually goes into something else that Richard Meyer at Diversity in Comics has stated before. He talked about the fact that after he watched a review for X-23, he said that, you know, these people who write these books, he used to criticize them because he thought that they could do better. But he realizes that they can't do better, and therefore criticizing them is no longer an option. This is when he started to apologize to some people. And I would disagree with that completely. I would say that, no, these people aren't lazy writers, nor are they at the top of their game and simply can't do any better. When they write these characters who are jackasses, when they write these characters in these stereotypical ways in order to shove things in your face, it's not them being bad writers. I would say that because Sana Amanat is the director of content and character development, she is specifically directing these people to write in this way. Because, of course, this is what is happening with identity politics. It needs to be that way. It has to be that way. These characters have to be written that way. And so these people are specifically writing that way, these characters in that way. Specifically. It's not bad writing at all. It is exactly what they are hired to do at Marvel. Anyways, if I've given you anything new to think about, hit like, hit the shield in the lower right-hand corner of your screen to subscribe, and leave me a comment. Leave me something new to think about. All right. I'll see you later. Bye.